Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. It's blazing hot. I've just finished some outdoor painting and I'm going to cool off in the air conditioning for a little bit and see if I can get this podcast done. We'll pick up where we left off yesterday. The questioner, who is what we might call an anti-papist, someone who rejects the Pope and the hierarchy of the church, says, has not the fact of an organized visible hierarchy led to great troubles in the temporal sphere? Hey, it's a well-worded question. I mean, you got to admit, the person is eloquent, if nothing else, but quite misguided. What they mean is, the church is an institution. Many Protestants think this, and it's especially an idea that's been sown by the Masons. Freemasonry is dedicated to the destruction of the Catholic Church. They have two tenets: destruction of all monarchy and destruction of the Catholic Church. Freemasonry views the Catholic Church as a government, sort of like a one world government trying to take over, as opposed to a church. They have a lot of conspiracies, but this is where you get like those crazy little chick book comic books that they used to leave in bathrooms on the interstates, which would show the Pope is like a puppet master running countries. Look, y'all, if that was true, abortion would be illegal throughout the world, wouldn't it? Yeah. Gay marriage would be illegal throughout the world. For that matter, the Masonic order would be illegal throughout the world. Hitler said famously, or maybe it was Stalin. No, I think it was Stalin said famously, when the Catholic Church denounced communism in the Soviet Union, how many divisions does the Vatican have? The Vatican has no army. There's no one forces you. I wish they did have some sort of enforcement power. We could definitely stand to have a lot of politicians who claim to be Catholic stripped of that designation, but there is no, outside of Vatican City, where the Swiss Guard actually acts as a security force. There's no Catholic army. There's no Catholic police force. There's no Catholic FBI. There's no equivalent Catholic. There's no Catholic equivalent to the Masonic order, or the Illuminati, if you want to go down that road, or the Elders of Zion. I mean, there's no, certainly no World Economic Forum or anything like that, where the Catholic Church is pulling the strings of all countries. If there were, all countries of Western Europe and America and Canada and Mexico and all that would actually have laws that adhered to Catholic teaching, and quite the opposite is true. Well, they answer, even had it done so, that would not alter the fact that Christ willed its existence. But what precisely do you intend, or do you mean? The person says, I allude to the fact that the Roman Church has ever striven for and possessed temporal power. They answer, remember that the Church has to exercise the authority of Christ in this world. To do this, she needs to be free to deal with Catholics of every nationality, and therefore to be free from the political interference of any particular nation. Now, she can be free either by being independent of all rulers or being subject to a king who guarantees absolute liberty of the action, at least of the Pope. Kings, however, have been jealous of the authority and prone to abuse it. If they grant freedom, they always regard it as being by privilege, and there is ever the danger that, if they happen to be displeased, they would try to interfere with the Church's administration. Hence, God's providence arranged that certain early kings legally donated territory to the Church, rendering her independent of earthly authority altogether. After hundreds of years, these states were illegally taken from the Church, and she certainly protested. The person says, was Pius IX just when he plotted to keep the Papal States and hinder a united Italy? Amazing that they would think a nation is greater than the Church founded by God, but okay. They answer, Pius IX was in just possession of the Papal States, and he was just in taking all ordinary precautions to preserve what lawfully belonged to the Church. Person says, but you cannot escape the fact that the Catholic Church is a kingdom of this world, although Christ said that his kingdom was not of this world. And they answer, the Catholic Church is not a kingdom of this world. It is the kingdom of Christ in this world. And the Pope, as Pope, is not a monarch of the Church in any national sense. No nation considers sway his rules over the millions of Catholics of every race and clime. He has temporal authority today in the Vatican City, but that is merely that he may secure complete immunity from the interference of worldly powers. Person says, Christ said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar and to God the things that are God. And they answer, he did. And the Pope demands independent of any earthly king's authority, precisely that of Caesar, the worldly power, may not interfere with the things that belong to God. And he says, you say that the Pope is not swayed by national considerations. In a war between Italy and England, would not his sympathies be with Italy? And they answer, the Pope, as Pope, must forget his nationality. As a man, his sympathies might be with Italy, but he could not favor Italy in its official capacity. Despite his national sympathies, the Pope has insisted upon being perfectly independent of all Italian authority. This was especially true in the 1930s when they wrote this. This is Mussolini era, okay? Mussolini was extremely anti-Catholic. There was definitely no sympathy of the Pope toward Italy in World War II. If an English Pope had done this, many would have ascribed it to anti-Italian prejudices. But when an Italian Pope insists on it, those whose national sympathies are all with Italy, there is no explanation except that in his official capacity, the Pope refuses to be an Italian. If an unjust war broke out between Italy and England, and Italy was in the wrong, the Pope would condemn the unjust policy of England. And they say, but in almost every country where she exists, the Catholic Church meddles with politics and causes trouble. Very English attitude, by the way. Catholics are human beings with souls devoted to the service of God according to the Catholic faith, yet with bodies which link them with the world and render them subject to social relations and duties. These duties are regulated to a great extent by civil law, and Catholics do their share as citizens in the making of those laws. But do not think that all their activities as citizens are necessarily to be attributed to them as Catholics and to be regarded as due to the influence of the Catholic Church. I guess we'll get one more here. Actually, we probably need about three. Yes, three more questions. Yeah, we're going to go a little bit long in this. It's the same guy asking the same question, so I'm going to try to finish up this section. He says, the Catholic Church controls Italy, Spain, Ireland, and Mexico. Were that true? Even in the 1930s. Catholic Church certainly did not control Ireland. The English controlled Ireland, waging a genocide and enslaving half the people of Ireland and shipping them all over the world at their will. Catholic Church certainly did not control Mexico at this time. The communists, Pancho Villa and the communists had waged a revolution in Mexico. Spain remained loyal. Spain was actually really good. If you were actually to study the history of Spain in the early 1900s, you would find that it was the most anti-communist country. Now, that doesn't mean it was on the side of the Catholic Church. It just means that it was against the communist revolutions that were taking over. And as I said, Mussolini, if he hadn't taken Italy by this point, was well in the process, and I think he already had. And these were Masons. These were Masonic. This was Masonic order. So they answer, the majority of the people in the countries you mentioned happen to be Catholics, but that does not mean that the Catholic Church, as a church, has political control. Meantime, the Church does not want political control here and would absolutely refuse on principle to accept it were it offered. I wish that were not the case. I think all nations should answer to the kingdom of God, the Catholic Church. I think all rulers of this world should be subject to the Pope, but that's my opinion. They say, but you cannot deny that the Church has experts, but you cannot deny that the Church exerts political influence in the face of all the political diplomats of the Vatican. And they answer, the Church devotes her energies to assisting men in their spiritual needs, but since they are human beings in this world, The spiritual needs are often bound up with earthly cares. For men's bodily needs, the church has inspired the construction of institutions, homes, orphanages, and hospitals throughout the world. In national and civic matters, she tries to sway the conduct of men by some degree of political influence, since the politicians of this world so often trespass against God's laws. But the church does not interfere in lawful political matters, which are of a civic moment only, and which involve no violation of moral principles. And finally, I think, yes, we can. Oh, the person goes on quite a bit. But we'll finish up tomorrow. I just get one last question, and then they're going to get into like actual English politics about the Labor Party and such. But the person says, are Catholics told in the confessional how to vote on political questions? And that's a very English assertion. I've never actually encountered any anti-Catholic in the United States that believes that we're told in the confessional how to vote. Would that we were. Would that we were. There we go. Would that we were. I do wish our priests would tell us, hey, y'all, you cannot vote for a politician that supports abortion. But usually they keep their mouth shut, and that's really not good. That's to their shame and to the detriment of us all. But in England, for a long time, they maintained that priests told people how to vote in the confessional, and that was one of the ways they tried to get rid of the Catholic Church. So the answer being, not necessarily. If an anti-Christian law is proposed, the priest would probably warn his people publicly from the pulpit, and yes, they should. In such a case, he should do his best to persuade them to be true to God and to vote against any law which would forbid repeating the words of Christ, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. If some individual wished for personal advice in the confessional, he could ask it there. But in ordinary matters, Catholics are told neither in the confessional nor from the pulpit how to vote. They are told that they are free. Yeah, I wish that was not true. I think our priests should be far more stringent and outspoken on social issues. Frankly, if they were, maybe we could purge some of the communists from the church. We actually do have some really anti-Catholic communists that are priests and perhaps even bishops in the Catholic Church. Some might say even a pope. But they keep their political views secret under this guise of a separation between church and state. No, I don't believe in a separation between church and state. I believe the church should tell people what's right and wrong, and every political leader should either agree with it or state flat out he opposes the church and her teachings, and the people could make their choices accordingly. And if you vote for an evil man, you've committed a mortal sin. If you vote for someone who promotes abortion and gay marriage, we could go down that road. You voted for an evil man, and you've committed a moral sin. And I think we really ought to have, the old-fashioned Irish Catholic priest who would go into the pub, and if there was a man in there drinking and not providing for his family, he'd drag him out by the collar and beat the crap out of him, and then tell him he needed to come to confession on Saturday. That's actually, I believe, the legitimate role of the priest. I think they should be much more involved, not only in civil affairs, but in the personal lives of their parishioners. I believe that 100%. That is the role of the father in the household, in the family, and we call our priest father for a reason. Keep everything polite and calm and everybody in the closet, I don't agree with whatsoever. No, I want a church militant, and I want that church militant to be led by a fire-breathing priest who is absolutely on fire for the gospel and believes everything that the in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and will absolutely smack some people around. And I mean physically. I mean, I want, I want the Irish Catholic priest of old who would literally go and, challenge somebody to pull the guy out and make him stand his ground. and in front of the entire community. And yeah, you get a sinner in front of the entire community who's running around on his wife and not feeding his children. You think he's going to stand there and have a fist fight with the priest? Well, some of us Irish are actually that bloody minded, and the priest should be able to throw a good right hook. Right jab, left hook. I don't know. It depends on what handed you are. It depends, you know. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. I believe in the old-fashioned smack you upside the head priesthood. That's just me. Maybe you're, airy-fairy and you want everybody to be happy and get along and all your priests to be homosexuals and, some women to have roles in the church. I don't. I want a priest that will go in there and smack somebody upside the head and tell them that they're going to hell if they don't get their life straightened out. I do think that's actually the role of the spiritual father of the parish. Call me crazy, but I do. All right, y'all. So let's get we're back to the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, and we get into the topic of idolatry. Father Spirago states, idolatry or the worship of false gods. Every human creature feels himself to be dependent upon one supreme being, and therefore is conscious of an inward impulse to adore that supreme being. He who does not adore the true God will adore the creature. This is idolatry. The creature, he means creation, anything in the natural world. He who does not worship God in the manner in which he is revealed and which the church prescribes will ere long to continue to worship him after a debased and foolish fashion, and this is the false worship of God. Idolatry is the worship of a creature and which is regarded as a deity, e.g. the sun, fire, animals, images, etc. Idolatry is frequently met in the history of the Jews. Witness the worship of the golden calf in Exodus, 32, I think? Or the adoration of the statue of, I always have trouble with this, Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3. Remember the soldiers who fought under Judas Maccabeus who fell in battle because they had idols concealed under their coats. Judas had prayers and sacrifice. This is Judas Maccabeus, not Judas who betrayed Jesus. This is from the book of Maccabees, which if it's not in your Bible, you don't have a real Bible, go get a real Bible, which has the book of Maccabees in it, among others. Judas had prayers and sacrifices offered for the men who were thus punished. In the time of persecution, some of the early Christians were guilty of idolatry because from fear of the torture awaiting them, they offered incense upon altars of pagan gods. And at the French Revolution, the people of France fell into the sin of idolatry when a woman personating the goddess of reason was adored in the house of God. Something they don't talk about in school anymore. The French Revolution was not a good thing. Yes, they had a prostitute, called her the goddess of reason, and set her up in Notre Dame Cathedral, and then raped and killed all the nuns. French Revolution was not a good thing. It was essentially the first communist revolution. To this day, the heathens worship idols. The heathen changed the glory of the Creator into the glory of the creature, Romans 1:23. In Asia, where the heavenly bodies shine with greater brilliance than the northern lands, the sunlight's brighter, you can see the planets better, that's what he's saying. The people looked upon the sun and the moon and the stars as gods, and also fire, the source of light, and the winds and the great waters. It's Wisdom 13:2. The Egyptians mostly worshipped animals which were either useful or hurtful, such as the cat. Yeah, people didn't used to like cats, by the way. The hawk, the crocodile, and especially the apis, a black bull with a white scar on its forehead, and other peculiar marks which was kept in the temple. The Romans and Greeks again worshipped statues and images of pagan gods. As the heathen had fallen away from the true God, as a punishment, he permitted them, through the practice of idolatry, to degrade themselves by their most hideous vices. Romans 1:28. They represented their divinities as vicious as themselves and the patrons of vice in others. By indulging in the vice of which any particular god was the protector, they thought they did him honor. The worship of false gods was nothing less than the service of devils. That's 1 Corinthians 10:20. For the devil was the animating spirit of idolatry. He dwelt in the idols and often spoke through them. They're very interesting. Been reading early church fathers. Athenagoras, he wrote, I guess, in the first century of the church to the emperors of Rome and Greece, asking them not to persecute the Christians. And as he defends the Christian religion as not being atheistic, which was the charge against him because they didn't worship the gods, he goes through and gives a remarkable history about how all the gods of the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Scythians and the Babylonians, etc., where they actually came from, and that the seemingly miracles or graces, favors granted by them to their worshipers were done by demons. Really interesting document. I encourage you to read that. Wonderfully logical and great history. A lot of insight in that one. David says, the gods of the Gentiles are devils. That's in Psalms. How thankful we ought to be to Almighty God for the blessing of the gospel. It is to show our gratitude for this benefit that we stand while the gospel is read during Mass. 3/4 of the human race are still plunged in pagan darkness. That is to say, about 800 million are heathens. Well, this was written in the 1890s. Since then, most of Christian Europe has fallen away into pagan heathenism. And we've had communist revolutions in China and, of course, Russia and Cuba and etc., North Korea, and many people who were once Christian are no longer Christian. And if he said 800 million were heathens in 1890, we could probably say about 2 billion now, minimum. Every year, and he said they were particularly found in India, China, and Japan. Probably still true, but you can add a lot of European and South American countries and a good bit of America and Canada. I would say Canada is almost an apostate nation at this point. Every year, and America no better, honestly, no better, except we still have a semblance of religious freedom, which they've pretty much gotten rid of in Canada. And now we have a communist that's ruling Mexico, so we expect to see a huge persecution there, and Brazil. So, the end of the world's not going to come until the gospel's preached to all nations and all people get a chance to believe or not believe in God as they choose. We've taken huge steps backward where the gospel's not allowed to be preached. In Norway, Sweden, Canada, ministers who just read the Bible are arrested because it speaks against homosexuality and such. We may have taken a couple steps forward since 1890. We've taken several backward. Anyway, every year the Holy Father sends out more missionaries to the heathens. Catholics ought to support these missionaries by their prayers, their alms. The Association for the Propagation of Faith and the Holy Childhood of Jesus have been instituted for this object. Frankly, we need them going door to door in America like the Jehovah's Witnesses do. I mean, if they want to go to the South Seas, they're probably going to find better Christians there than they will in rural North Carolina or a city in, New York. All right. Another form of idolatry is when a human being gives up his whole self to a creature. It would be absurd to call a man an idolater because he offers to a false god a few grains of incense which he ought to offer to the true God, and not to apply the same term to one who devotes his whole life to the world instead of God. The avaricious are preeminently idolaters, Ephesians 5:5, for they consecrate their every thought, their every exertion. They sacrifice their health, their life to mammon, to the god of money, essentially, to the pursuit of this world's goods. Covetousness is the service of idols, Colossians 3:5. All who are engrossed in material interests are guilty of idolatry, especially the avaricious, the proud, the intemperate, and the unchaste. Whatever a man desires and adores, that is his god. The god of the avaricious is gold, Hosea 8:4. The god of the proud is honor. The god of the glutton is his belly, Philippians 3:19. The god of the unchaste is his own lusts, 1 Corinthians 6:15. The greed of grain, the pride of life, The greed of gain, the pride of life, the sensual pleasures are worshipped by the worldling. Parents are also guilty of idolatry if they cherish an inordinate affection for their children. Now, that's a very controversial statement these days. But yes, parents who spoil their children are guilty of idolatry, but how much more so so-called pet parents, those who treat their dogs and cats, etc., like their children and esteem them above all things. Wisdom 14:15 is the reference for that. And again, if you don't have a Bible that contains the book of wisdom, you have a counterfeit Bible and you need a real Bible. Go get yourself a Catholic Bible. The service of idols is a high treason against the majesty of God and the most heinous of sins. St. Thomas Aquinas declares the worship of idols to be the greatest of all sins. Among the Jews, it was punishable by death, Exodus 22:20. On one occasion, no less than 23,000 Jews were put to death by God's command for this transgression, Exodus 32:28. He who worships idols incurs the curse of God, Deuteronomy 27:15. Think of the lamentable condition of the heathen. Some of them have become so degraded through idolatry that they have sunk into vice of cannibalism. True. The apostle, and that's regardless of Joe Biden's crazy fantasies about his uncle, there are, and there were, and there still are now, cannibals in this world. In fact, the gangs, the warlords that have taken over Haiti that are practice voodoo are cannibals. They're eating people. And that's how they're actually spreading their power and imposing fear over people. And don't tell me they're not demon-possessed. They are absolutely demon-possessed. The Haitians are some of the best people on earth, but they have been plagued by voodoo and idolatry and horrible, horrible conditions for quite a while. The apostle says idolaters, adulterers, and the covetous and drunkards and others shall not possess the kingdom of God, 1 Corinthians 6:10. Continuing on this theme, it discusses foolish or perverted worship, and this includes superstition, fortune-telling, spiritualism, and magic are foolish and irrational forms of worship. We would include voodoo in that, without a doubt. Superstition consists in ascribing to created things powers which they do not possess, either by their nature or in virtue of the prayers of the church. Superstition is of a pagan origin. Among the Romans, the will of the gods was divined by the horoscopes, the entrails of animals, in other words. That's where we get the word horoscope. It comes from horospicus, and it just means fortune-telling, essentially. The Greeks consulted the oracle of Delphi. The priestess was seated upon a tripod upon a fissure in the earth, whence a stupefying vapor arose, and in her incoherent utterances, when a state of unconsciousness, through this exhalation, the mystic meaning was attached. In other words, she sat over gases coming up from the earth, which would make her quite high in a stupor, and she would babble, and people would write down what they thought were her prophecies. Many popular and local customs that linger among us in the present day are relics from heathen times. These superstitions are generally found among people who do not care for religion. Superstition and unbelief go hand in hand. Children born on a Sunday are said to be fortune's favorite. Friday is considered an unlucky day for the commencement of an enterprise or for starting on a journey. To sit down 13 to a table is regarded a fatal omen. Some people wear charms, such as the four-leaf clover, about them to ensure good fortune. What folly this is! These we call natural superstitions because they refer to natural objects. On the other hand, those people are not to be called superstitious who make use of or carry on their persons things which the church has consecrated or blessed, and which consequently are endued with supernatural efficacy. To wear a cross which has been blessed, or a rosary, or a relic, or to take holy water, hoping thereby to be preserved by God from evil, is not superstitious. But if a greater efficacy than they possess is ascribed to these things, for instance, if it is thought that the fact of lighting a blessed candle during a storm will avert the thunderbolt, that mere wearing or recital of a certain of certain prayers will preserve from drowning or of death by fire, then we have an instance of superstition. In other words, even blessed objects can be misused. This kind of superstition is called religious because it has a reference to sacred objects. Fortune-telling or soothsaying is an attempt to discover hidden or future events by means of things that are not in themselves calculated to reveal them. The heathens of old made use of astrology for this purpose. From the course of or conjunction of the planets, they forecast the destiny of individuals. Even nowadays, many regard the appearance of a comet as presaging war or famine. The Roman augurs predicted what was about to happen by watching the flight of birds, listening to the cries they uttered, or observing the manner in which the sacred fowls devoured their food. What strange delusion! In the present day, however, Christians sometimes use cards as a means of divination. If the public papers are to be believed, there are in Paris 800 women who tell fortunes by cards. Again, 1890s. I'm sure there are many more now. And they are invited to the houses of the great to exercise their art. There are also many who believe in the portents of dreams or in palmistry, reading of palms, or who think to foretell the future by combinations of numbers and figures and the like contemptible devices. Of course, in our own times, we've had the Bible code fad of the 1990s, where they said by certain combinations of numbers you could find secret messages in the Bible. Pure heresy. Really not good. They attach superstitious meaning to the howling of a dog at night, which is said to predict the death of its owner, the hour a watch happens to stop, etc. Those who play the lottery connect certain letters with certain events, either real or phantoms of dreams. On the occasion of an earthquake in Rome in 1895, 1,000,000 francs was put into the lottery on a number of 11, this being the date of the earthquake, other tickets for large sums being taken for an hour and minute at which it occurred. All these numbers were drawn blank. And that in this 19th century, the age of enlightenment. Yes, the 19th century, the age of enlightenment. In many ways, far more enlightened than we are now. On the other hand, the forecasts of meteorologists for the predictions of what weather may be expected from the observation of natural phenomena is, of course, perfectly legitimate. This is we get into this sometimes with certain Protestant groups. You can tell by the sky how the weather's going to be. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in the morning, sailor take warning. That means that the sun will reflect on the clouds a certain way if a storm's coming up. Cows lie down before a storm. Divining rods to help people find water. No one knows how they work, but they do actually work. And, there have been times in the mountains of North Carolina where they call them water witches, and they face persecution. Well, I don't know how or why, but somehow God gives certain people, a genetic ability to find water using a stick. Water in the ground. I don't mean a creek. I can't explain it, but that's a natural phenomenon. If I hadn't seen it myself, I would think that it may be superstition, but I have, and I have to believe it's a gift given by God. If it's a gift given by a demon, then it's wrong. But considering these are very, very traditional Christian, conservative, very devout people who pray a lot, I don't think that to be the case. But I could be wrong. Anyway, certain natural phenomena like flowers closing before a storm, leaves shimmering in the breeze, we can predict certain things. Spiritualism is the invocation of spirits in view of learning what is hidden from the human. Spiritualists offer themselves to act as instruments or mediums to the spirit, their design being that some unknown spirit, that is, a devil, should communicate with mankind by means of their hand or voice, or by some other manifestation such as rapping or tapping. You got to remember, 1890 seances were huge. This was like the height, about 1880 to 1940, probably, more like 1920. But this was the height of Edgar Cayce and the seances and all the crystal balls and all that kind of stuff that you see in old movies. St. Thomas Aquinas says it is sinful to seek instruction for the devil, since the Holy Scriptures, the Word of God, are placed within our reach. Let there not be found anyone that consulteth spirits, for the Lord abhorreth all these things. He hates that, in other words. It's Deuteronomy 18:11. Spiritualists are often excused on the plea that they are Christian and call upon the name of God, but for that very reason they are to be condemned. Because they profane God's holy name by professing to be Christian, they act as do the heathens. Magic or sorcery is the invocation of spirits in order to produce miraculous effects. It is an undeniable fact that among the heathen there were individuals who worked wonders by the devil's aid. There were magicians in Egypt at the time of Moses who by their enchantment imitated the miracles of God. Exodus 7:11. In the days of the apostles, a magician named Simon lived in Samaria who deluded many by his sorceries. Acts 8:10. In fact, Simon the magician, or Simon is the Great, I think he called himself, claimed to be the Messiah and formed a completely rival church to the Christian church, and is the father of Gnosticism and the heresies, many of which are among the founding doctrines of Protestantism. Much of what Protestants believe actually come from the sorcerer, the magician Simon, who was a false Christ, an antichrist. We are also told that Antichrist will perform many wonders with the assistance of the evil one. Thessalonians 2:9. We talked about that recently. The Antichrist will essentially apparently perform all the miracles that Jesus performed. That's part of being the Antichrist. He'll do that through the magic and work of the devil and illusions and lies. The name of magician is not given to jugglers who by skill and sleight of hand perform astonishing feats. He means people who are jugglers, or what we would call magicians these days, who do magic tricks, so-called, to entertain, are not practicing black magic. They're not doing anything evil. This perverted form of worship is a grievous sin. God says, "The soul shall go aside after magicians and soothsayers. The soul that shall go aside after magicians and soothsayers I will destroy out of the midst of the people." Leviticus 26. David said, "Thou hast hated them that regard vanities to no purpose." That's in Psalms, I think, 30, verse 7. He who trusts to vain things or to evil spirits ascribes more power to them than to God. He tacitly denies the divine attributes of sanctity, omnipotence, wisdom, etc. How canst thou hope for grace from God, as St. John Chrysostom, if thou dost abandon him and have recourse to the evil enemy? This sin brings down severe chastisements from God. I can't pronounce this name. Ochozias. Ochozias. I don't know. One of the kings of Israel sent to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Akron, whether he should recover from his sickness. The prophet Elias met the messenger and said to him, "Go and return to the king that sent you, and say to him, Thus saith the Lord, Is it because there was no God in Israel that thou sendest to Beelzebub? Therefore thou shalt not come from thy bed, but thou shalt surely die." That's 4 Kings, verse 1. Or chapter, book 1, I guess. Ochozias expired shortly thereafter. Superstitious people have no peace. They are timid and apprehensive. Every trifle alarms them. They are dismayed and afraid to act when they perceive what they consider as portents or signs. Other sins follow in the trail of this perversion of reverence due to God, such as abuse of holy things, for instance, relics and images, or injustice and want of charity towards one's neighbor. Superstitious people are easily misled by their omens into rash judgments and hasty condemnation of others, or they refuse to do them a service lest it should bring them ill luck, etc. You might think of the evil eye. I had a friend in Israel, actually, she was Jewish but was born with blue eyes, and people, both Jews and Muslims, said she had the evil eye, and they didn't even want to associate with her. So that's that kind of superstition. All right, so we will now finish this one up with how does one sin against the first commandment? The first commandment of God is transgressed, 1, by neglecting prayer. The heathen had their household gods. They were to be seen in the halls of palaces as well as above the threshold of the lowliest dwellings. Yet Catholics who worship the true God too often deny him the daily homage due him. The followers of Muhammad never omit when their muezzin calls to pray. The daily call to prayer, we'll go with that, to kneel down and perform their even in public spaces, while the Christians who hold the true faith do not scruple to dispense with prayer almost entirely. Unhappy is the household where family prayer is an unknown thing. 2. By opposing religion, either by speaking against the faith or by the publication or dissemination of books and periodicals hostile to the faith, or by joining associations of anti-Christian character. 3. By worshiping idols or being engrossed in material interests. 4. By superstitions. 5. By telling fortunes or having one's fortune told. And 6. By invoking spirits, either for the purpose of searching out what is hidden or of doing what cannot be done in the ordinary course of nature. So y'all, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Remember the words of St. Padre Pio, pray, hope, and don't worry. And I'll talk to you next time.